So let us pray. Go before us, O Lord, in all our doings, with your gracious favor, and further us with thy continual help, that in all our works, begun, continued, and ended in thee, we may praise thy holy name, and finally, by thy mercies, obtain everlasting life. Through Christ our Lord. Amen.
So there's our topics for today. That the bishop will give us an update, and he's going to speak to General Synod, as well as the follow-up from his charge at our Synod. And then Archdeacon Jane will then talk through around Safe Church and the work that's going on there. And then I'll bounce back to talk through a few items, including insurance and cemeteries and CMM. And then we'll go to our usual Q&A. So Bishop,
Okay,
back to you.
Thank you, Alex. I am very grateful for everyone who came to Synod. I think we had a very good Synod together. And I wanted to follow up on the things that I spoke about in the charge and where we're going to move from there. So at the last Synod Council meeting, which was the first of this Synod Council, I talked about starting the process of looking at, as I said in the charge, how we do the business of being church. And are there ways, places where we can save money, find efficiencies, look at the ways that we do things and seeing if there's a way we can do it easier, do it better, or lift some of the burden that falls on parishes. So the Synod Council was given a piece of homework, and I want to extend that homework to everyone here if they're interested. I'm looking for between 2 and 4 names of people who might help us look at all of our systems and our ways of doing things as a diocese. The point here is we're going to call together a working group to look at how we are doing as far as the business of being church. And I'm looking for people with an ability to look at systems, people from business, people from banks, people from anywhere that might be able to help us, or if you have a particular gift in logistics or how organizations run or something like that. If you know someone in your parish, please let us know. That's kind of a wide call to folks. There's a lot of expertise out there, especially among some of our retirees, and I don't want to leave anything on the table. The purpose of this is for us to look at in the charge, I talked about 3 interlocking areas. The first is leadership, the second is mission, and the third is how we do the business of being church. And where these 3 things all intersect is, I think, where we need to look at how we are doing what we are doing. Along with that is my point about being bringing back some of the joy of being a parish. There's a certain amount of administrative creep that happens in church land. You start out, we have to do this in January, we do this in March, or we do this in April. And then suddenly there's a great idea about we need a representative for this committee, and then we need a report from that committee, and we want someone to say something to another committee about what's going on in your church. And before long, wardens end up sort of bewildered alongside their clergy, thinking, how are we going to do this? We don't have enough people to be representative and go to all the meetings and do all the things that are being asked. So part of that is for us to, and the first piece of the puzzle will be, and don't react to the word, an audit of what is expected of parishes and what we do at the Synod office at what time of year. Where are our busy times? Where are our pinch points? What is expected as far as financial reports, and when about things like their annual charity returns and all that kind of stuff, and sort of get it onto a calendar so we have a sense of what it is every parish is facing, because I think that will give us a better idea about how we can streamline, how we can find help for one another, ways in which we can combine our strengths, or other ways we can do this work. So number one, if you have someone you know, please speak to them and see whether or not they'll give you permission to send in their name to the Synod office for us to start this work in the fall. And number two, be prepared for, guess what? Another piece of work. But in this case, it'll be to find out, is there a point in the year where you hear too much from us, or you don't hear enough from us, or you are expected to report on this, that, and the other, and it all kind of piles up on you. We want to make sure we find out what happens in the year. And my last piece, as far as updates are concerned, is to say we're heading out to General Synod over the weekend, and I'm wondering if anyone here has any questions about General Synod and what is happening and what's coming up. So those are my three things: the follow-up to our Synod and what we're doing as far as the next steps for planning and working on the working group for how we do church. Number two is looking at an audit of all the things that are required and when they're required. And that audit's going to affect us in this office too. We're going to find out when are our pinch points? When are we super busy? When are we asking for things, so that we can actually begin to smooth things out? So any questions about General Synod or anything else I've said?
If anybody wants to ask, you are on mute, so you'll need to just pop yourself off mute.
We need an electronic version of crickets going, so we know.
I have a question.
Yes.
It's Ian Ritchie speaking. I wrote to Eileen Scully a few months ago about the correct translation of Psalm 104, verse 27. And because I had had discussions with our Old Testament professor at Queen's about this verse when he did a series on the scriptures in regard to creation, I pointed out that our BAS translation is idiosyncratic. There's no other translation of that verse that says what it says, and it's kind of weird theologically. The way the BAS says it is, there move the ships, and there is that Leviathan which you have made for the sport of it.
Yes.
But the original Hebrew does not bear that out. Most translations say something like that which you have made to sport in it.
So
God made Leviathan to sport in the ocean, not for the heck of it, as if God does things just for the heck
just
of it.
for the heck of it, yeah.
Yeah. And she agreed, that it seems fairly simple. It should be relatively easy to amend, but because it is the BAS is owned by General Synod, it may actually require a vote of General Synod.
Oh,
so
what
I don't
could
know
be
if there's
easier,
anything.
Ian?
Sorry, pardon?
What could be easier, Ian, than getting
What
General
could be-
Synod to revise
Yeah,
something
right.
we say in church?
So I'm wondering if you have seen anything on the order papers in regard to a resolution about anything in the BAS for that matter that might need to be altered. I think there is at least one other thing I've seen that people have referred to that might need to be altered. Of course, there's we need to change references to Queen Elizabeth to King Charles, of course.
The royal references are being done automatically.
Yeah.
As far as this psalm is concerned, I've not seen anything on the order paper from Faith, Worship, and Ministry to deal with this. Because, of course, they'll try and tell us they need a blue ribbon commission and a 6-year study period in order to do. But I am perfectly willing to bring that to the attention of Faith, Worship, and Ministry. There is some head of steam brewing over some of the alternative collects as well. You might have seen some of that buzz out there. I want you to know that in 2019, when those collects were proposed, I actually stood up and said all the things that have been said in these articles about these collects, and I was roundly criticized and told to sit down and shut up. I was being too fundamentalist or literal.
Oh my.
But the reality is that FWM has got an enormous amount of work on their plates, and they don't really relish the idea of any kind of prayer book revision. But to be blunt, I'll bring it up, and I would suggest that if you, and I'm assuming it was Dr. Morrow,
Yes.
if the two of you put together a one-paper executive summary, we could get it into Faith Worship Ministry and put it on the docket for the next series of changes to the BAS.
Good. Now, should I forward that to you?
If you forward it to me, I will make sure it gets where it's supposed to go.
Okay. Very good.
Bishop, I
Thank
see
you.
that, thanks, Ian. Heather Rule has a question. Stand up.
Hi, Heather.
Hi. No, I didn't actually. I was just getting familiar with the buttons.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that.
Not a problem.
We'll all wave back.
If that's the worst thing that happens today, we've had a pretty good day. Any other questions for the bishop on his update? Thank you. So with that, we're going to jump over to the newly collated executive archdeacon for the diocese, and Jane, we'll jump over to you to take us away.
Thank you, Alex, and hello, everybody. You can see on the agenda as it's presented, I'm going to speak about safe church or screening in faith. I first want to say that I'm going to use the language safe church as the broad umbrella of everything I'm talking about. Screening in faith is still a valid term and people like to use that. There's a handbook called Screening in Faith Handbook, but sometimes it narrows our thinking just to the screening part of all of the work involved with safe church. So that's why you're seeing both language, and eventually, hopefully, we'll just be saying safe church to one another when we are talking about our policies and protocols. So my broad work that I'm doing over the next 2 months is looking at our policies with a lens through our insurers to make sure that our policies are up to date and to see if there are changes we want to make. We do live with policies on sexual misconduct and harassment, bullying, things like that. And also then looking at our protocols, how we ensure that the churches are safe for a vulnerable population and for all our employees and lay people, both lay and ordained and volunteers, and really any group that gathers in our spaces, outside groups, that they are aware that we have a way of conducting ourselves when we are together as church and when we're in our church buildings especially, and then when we're out exercising ministry. So this is a big umbrella. There's work that I've been reviewing from other dioceses so that we're not reinventing anything, that we can use materials that are already prepared by some of the bigger dioceses, and looking at how we're currently doing our screening and what the protocols are. So I do want to speak sort of specifically about two aspects of screening, of things we need to do now, because we are working with the policies that we have. Any policy changes will go to synod, so that takes a longer time to do that work. We're working with the policies we have now, and part of the policy is that everyone understands what they are and how we exercise them, and what to do when we're creating our safe spaces, what are the ways to limit risk and to make sure that people are cared for, how we are moving forward in relationships in the church, those sorts of things. All of that, we're working with those already. The protocols, one of the important protocols, of course, is that people receive some training and are screened. And the training that is helpful is that we gather together for some workshops. And I really appreciate that people have already been in touch with me saying we've got our people together, we're ready for some training to happen in the parish or in the deanery. So I am working towards doing that in the fall so that we can get that part done. The important part about doing our screening work is not just that we're ticking off boxes to say, well, we did our workshop and we did our police check, but that we understand and agree to how we're going to live together to care for people in the church. Specifically today, I just want to say a few things about the screening process of police checks. I know people think that that's the only part of screening. It's not, but it is an important part. It's important because we do need to document and be able to say to our insurers if something happens that a person who had some responsibility was in fact aware of policies, had addressed the steps to take to have a safe church environment, and that we did screen them, and we did put them through all their workshops. That's an important part of it. Around the screening, we here will accept a police report from someone, or we provide a service through Express Check, which is an easier service, and it's certainly more affordable in some circumstances. In some circumstances, you can do a police check at no fee. So I know there's a variety of ways of doing it as I'm learning about the diocese and all our different churches and employees and volunteers. I want to say for Express Check that, because I've had a few questions about it, when if you're using Express Check, then you are submitting a request electronically, and that request comes to me, and you get an acknowledgement that the request has been received. And that acknowledgement goes to the individual that sent it. So if the church office is sending copies of consent form and people's personal identification, then the church office receives that, or if an individual does it, then they receive that. And once it's received here, then I go to that email, I get a notice to open up the document, and then it's my responsibility as the authorized person to submit that to the Express Check portal. And the Express Check portal takes about 24 hours, and a response comes back that it is complete, that it's a negative for a person, or there might be a response that says there's information that's incomplete or incorrect. That's a possibility as well. What I'm trying to do in the office right now is to streamline that a little bit, because right now it's pretty cumbersome. There's a lot of steps. So I'm trying to reduce some of those steps so we can be efficient. And I'm also trying to limit my time for Express Check just to 1 day a week, so that I'm not opening up and going through the steps one at a time several days a week. So when you get a notice that says your response will take about 24 hours, that's the Express Check window. That's about how long it takes them. For me, I'm going to take, if you submit on a Monday, I may not do it until the Thursday. I'm going to try to do things on a Thursday, because once I get my computer going on all of these, it's easier for me to do them in a batch as opposed to one at a time. So that I just want to speak to that for people who wonder, it's not happening as fast as I thought it would. It'll still be within the week, but maybe not the 24-hour window. The other part currently of the system is that there's no notice that comes back to the individual. They got a notice to say that their request was submitted to me, but they don't hear what happens. And there's nothing built into the system right now for that to happen automatically. Generally, what happens is the church will know that people have been through the process, because they'll receive an invoice quarterly from the diocese to say, you had these people, this many people that did their screening through Express Check, and there's a fee for that. So I'm working on those aspects so that we can figure out how we can just communicate easily. And part of that is the way the forms are set up online. So that's going to take us some time to change them, but I don't want to make any changes until I've lived in this for a while, so that I can make sure that when we make changes, we're doing all of them at the same time, and we have a streamlined system. So that's the part of screening that I'm working on. The policy part is bigger, and my workshop deadline is in the fall, September and October. I'm hoping that we can do that in groups, and eventually hoping that we can do training online by watching videos or doing together in a webinar, and working towards making sure that everything is in terms of protocols are clear, that they're not too lengthy, that people can, if you've got a situation and you want to just get to the protocols and not have to work your way through a policy to find what steps to do. I'm trying to clear that up so that we can make this a regular part of church life, so it doesn't feel onerous, and that everyone's feeling confident in their understanding of policies. So I'll take any questions if you like about that, or we can move on.
I have a question, if I may, it's Russ Grant in North Hastings. So just clarification that to do the Express Check, we would send you the emails, names of the people that we would like to be done through that process.
No, when someone does a consent form, and,
Okay.
and provides the consent form and the copies of their ID. They get scanned and submitted to the link that you just go to submit. And then,
okay.
but it doesn't go directly to Express Check. It comes first to me to make sure it's complete, to
Got
make
it.
sure it's in the form that Express Check wants it. And then they do their thing, which is quick. Sometimes it's even same day. But then when I get it back, I do my part to file, but I haven't got anything in place to let you know. Unless I phoned you, because the form doesn't even have the individual's email address on it.
Oh,
Sometimes also is missing what church they're from. So we've got to figure that out too.
Okay. By coincidence, we had a conversation about this at our last council meeting and acknowledged that it was something we thought we needed to do that we hadn't done for some people for a while. So it's a very front of mind. And the benefit of doing Express Check over doing a police check, I assume, would be the efficiency and the cost, perhaps.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Terrific. Thank you.
Thanks, Russ.
I have a question.
Hi, Audrey.
Hi. You're saying that you can't let us know that you have it back, but I'm assuming if you got one back that had some issues, that you were concerned about this person, that you would let somebody know.
Yes,
Okay.
that would be, because the only information I would have that for the person is their home address and their phone number. So if there was an issue, I would certainly be in touch with that person.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. I just would hope that would happen.
So it's kind of if you don't hear anything from me, all is well.
Okay.
It's just
excellent.
done. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. I see St. John Prescott, but I don't know your name. Sorry.
Well, George Vale.
Oh.
St. John's Prescott. If I have a question, if I could.
Yes, I can't.
Well, pretty well answered, because in the part where you said that a person would not hear back from you, but you said that if you didn't, you can consider all as well. But I guess if you're going to help with a group or something, elders or children, and there's somebody that brings that group into your church, but you volunteer to help with them, and they say to you, well, do you have your safe check? And you say, well, I do, but I haven't got proof of it. They're going to say, well, sorry, you can't help. But when I sent you a request for that, and if I entered my email with it, would you email me back saying, George, you're either going to jail or no, you're going to help these people?
Absolutely. Yeah. Right now, if you want to know, then, the week after you've submitted something, you can email me and I can reply. I can even give you your copy that says it's complete and negative, right?
Okay.
As opposed to completed but criminal record. Yeah. I see a hand. I'm sorry, Alex, can you help me? It says St. John Prescott on the screen, but I don't know who it is. She's waving.
Okay, I'm just saying. Yeah,
can you unmute yourself? Can you unmute yourself and speak?
You take yourself off mute. I can't unmute. I can only mute. Up in the top right corner
yourself?
somewhere, there'll be the microphone with a little slash through it.
There.
There you go.
There you go.
Okay. Oh, hello. I'm sorry. Because there's two of us, we just put where we were from. My name is Debbie Hayes, and I am the People's Warden here at St. John's in Prescott. And this is Gail Bird, and she is the Rector's Warden here at Prescott. So we are the two official representatives from Prescott. My quick question was, do you know how much it costs to have your express check done for one person, or is there a flat rate?
I believe it's $25.75 per person.
Perfect.
But Joyce is here, so she can jump in if
We
I
were
don't
just
have that
curious.
correct. Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
I see Ian Ritchie's hand back up.
I was just wondering, just for clarification, are we talking about volunteers or clergy or both?
That's the fee for volunteers. I have not myself had a cleric yet because I'm assuming they're all up to speed. I have to go through their records, but I don't know what the fee is for an employee.
Okay. Thanks.
Oh, Ryan has his
Hey.
hand up.
How are you guys? My video's not working, sorry. I had a question, given all of the policies and what you were just saying about kind of rolling out and needing to kind of review some of this stuff so that we don't have to kind of go through all of these kind of processes and stuff just to find out what the rules are. Is it possible to even get kind of like a summary of expectations? We're in the midst of going through a change with our Sunday school and kind of rebuilding and reestablishing it. We have somebody new taking over, and I want to make sure that as we're establishing kind of a new kind of methodology with our Sunday school, just in general, that we're in keeping with the other practices. Like you said, it's not just about, police checks and things like that. Like, I don't know if there's supposed to be something about like record keeping of attendance and like which children. That just seems smart to me. But I was wondering if it might even be possible to have something emailed out to all the churches that just said, if you have a children's program, these are the things that you must be doing at this point in order to be in accordance with Safe Church as it is even now. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely, and that is my goal, so that it's clear and we're all on the same page, and it's not a burdensome document that you can. It's a bullet point with some backup documents behind that, so that you can do that. Yeah.
Perfect. That's appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks.
Audrey has her hand up.
Yeah, just following up to Ian's question. We did all the express checks at St. John's, including our organist, our caretaker, and our secretary. So they were 3 employees, and we were charged the same amount, the $25.75. So I don't know if that would be different for a clergy. I don't know why it would. So I'm assuming they would all be the same cost. Just for clarification.
Thank you.
Last call for questions. Okay, Jane, anything else to wrap it up?
No, just thank you very much, everyone. And please feel free to email me if you have any great suggestions for me to be thinking about or any questions.
Okay. Just get the deck back up here again. There we go. And there it comes. By the way, can anybody identify the picture from our cover slide today? Anybody recognize that one? A little bit of my bias, but that's the organ facade at St. George's, Trenton. Try and use different ones as we go through. So I'm going to talk about a couple of things today. And one of them has become much larger than certainly I'd like to. But there we have it. Sorry, I just got a note. Can you see the slides? Everybody see?
I see insurance coverage slides, Alex.
Perfect. That's it. Thank you, George. So we know why we have insurance for bad things. Something happens to the property, or something happens to people, or something happens that is somehow causing harm and damage, that's where the insurance is there to help cover the financial burden. It doesn't deal with any of the rest of it, but it does with the financial. We continue, and I spend a great deal of time these days on insurance. We continue to work provincially because, as you know, we put through, we met with ecclesiastical and put some things through with them. But in the longer term, we know that the way we're doing it today, we're not going to be able to, as we go, continue as we have. And there's a number of factors around it, but certainly the biggest of it will be cost. That, simply the cost of replacement cost on buildings is continues to rise, and it will as we go forward. So we're starting to look at solutions that will better fit for given churches, and how we can, because we are asset rich, how do we deal with that in the sense that we're asset rich and cash poor? So that's some of the work that's going on. We have engaged with a consultant, and the reason we did that simply was to ensure that when you deal with brokers and insurance companies, ultimately, while they may want to partner with you, they ultimately are trying to sell you something. And by using an independent consultant, they both aren't and can't sell us anything. So they're simply value for their expertise. And that's work that's being funded at the provincial level. And what we also hope to then lay down is how do we approach this down in the midterm to long term to create more options that will better suit, from a stewardship perspective, how we protect our assets, but in a way which is more cost effective and apropos in places. As you know, we made the change last year from Aon to Hub, and we are still heavily with ecclesiastical. That's where everything really but our umbrella policy sits. But there is a separate package outside of that. And the Hub team is there. There is stability there. A number of churches have had experience working with them, either on a claim or on adjusting valuation or on questions. But David and his team are there for us. Oops, sorry. So we are right now in the process of sending out the packages. Took a little longer than planned because we've changed brokers, and that changed a whole lot of things through. But the packages are on their way out. They're a little bigger than normal because David's added a few things to help support the churches. And then the invoicing will go into the June invoices. So you'll basically have, you'll get 6 months of coverage without interest. And that will, your invoicing for the second half of the year is there. So the one that's become a little more of a challenge right now. I mean, we've been dealing with the Bereavement Authority, the Funeral, Burial, Cremation Services Act. We've worked with the BAO since their inception, but they have become less and less flexible. And one of the areas that directly pertains to us is around the care and maintenance fund. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time just addressing that. The other thing is that very quietly they have they're pushing through some legislation that we are having significant concerns about. And this fits into the context that we know that the smaller cemeteries and some of the bigger ones, are struggling. A lot of this, the smaller cemeteries, there's really not much income coming in anymore from sales of interment rights. The income, because of the way care and maintenance funds have to be handled, the income is not as significant there. We know that costs have risen greatly. Grass cutting is probably the biggest one. And in a lot of cases, the grass was being cut by volunteers. And once you have to go and pay someone to do it, most cemeteries are seeing $4,000 or $5,000 bills in order to cut the cemetery. And so those types of things are presenting challenges. The increased regulatory requirement, and they are dead serious about their ALR1, the license reports, and the ALR2, which is the financial one. They are extremely serious. I'll talk to that in a moment about how serious that's getting. So we're continuing to work both with the BAO, but we've now also engaged at Queen's Park with the recent provincial election. When the House was recalled, there is a new minister on the commercial and business services side. And so we are working into Queen's Park to ensure that our concerns and issues are understood. We're also working with the Association of Municipalities, particularly in the area around when cemeteries are abandoned. So one of the things that's brought this a little more solidly to the fore is that the last few meetings we've had with the Bereavement Authority, they've become even more clear that there is no flexibility. That their goal, and in fact, in the meeting, the registrar was very clear that, because I used the term public good, and the registrar said their definition of public good is plain and simply full compliance with the legislation and regulations, and that's it. And I think, as everyone's aware, the province put in place, I think a couple of years ago, one of the initiatives that Ford brought forward was tackling red tape and trying to reduce red tape. And there is a whole ministry that is about red tape reduction. One of the things they do is they now can push things through quite quickly. And in this case, there's a piece that's going to the legislature in the fall that is fairly small things for about a dozen different pieces of legislation. But the Funeral, Burial, and Cremation Services Act, there's a fair size change. And some of those things we believe are of significant concern. So among things that we're concerned about, essentially, the BAO inspectors or auditors would have the right to enter any property, search and seize anything that they believe is germane to their work without a warrant or without a court order. And so what that translates is that they could walk into your church and demand and seize records or any other things that pertain to the cemetery. I believe this is more targeted to some of the funeral homes and some of the other cases where there's a little more misrepresentation and such, but this gives them full power to, without a judge's order or a warrant, to be able to enter, search, and seize. That's concerning. It gives them the ability to apply administrative penalties for lack of compliance. And those, again, would be not issued by a judge, they would be, or a justice of the peace, they would be agreed to by the registrar or one of his delegates, his or her delegates. So, and up to $25,000. So for example, not filing your ALR 1 and 2, today you will get some phone calls and they could eventually pull your license. But they will also now be able to apply penalties. And one of the interesting things that is right in the legislation is that they're not concerned about what your intention was. They're only concerned about whether you're compliant or not. So whether you intended to not comply or you did not intend not to comply, they don't care that you're still able to be assessed. And so the 7 dioceses, we see this as a significant matter. And so we are currently engaged at Queen's Park to try and work this and get that affected. But behind that, the one that's been the big issue, and this is probably the larger of them, is care and maintenance funds. So I think it was the 1960s when perpetual care was first put in place, and it was renamed care and maintenance funds, both for the cemetery itself and for markers. You're required by law to take a minimum amount or a share of all sales of interment rights and put that into care and maintenance, and as well for monuments that are built. So that's all written in the legislation and has been there for some time. The part where we get into issue is that their expectation in the act is that the fund is directly held by a trust company, an eligible trust company. And back in I think in the 80s, 90s, the diocese began a pooled fund for care and maintenance. And that fund is invested with TD Canada Trust. So it is in an eligible trust, but that pooled fund is held by the diocese, with each cemetery contributing into it, getting their statement, and the monthly income flows out. We currently hold about $1.5 million in that fund, and there's 45, depending, we've had a couple of cemeteries that have been transferred to municipalities, but we sit about 45 cemeteries right now across the diocese. So previously the BAO they were concerned, but were not pushing or taking action on that what they call pooled fund. They are now making it clear that they will not accept that at at a near point in the future. So each diocese is working. Some dioceses don't have pooled funds. Those of us that do, Diocese of Ontario included, are working to get with them to get that. We thought we had a plan that would be a transition. They've now made it clear that full compliance is the only acceptable answer. So the approach that we're currently looking at is that for some of the funds, it is justifiable to go to a trust company and set up. Some of the trust companies won't touch anything under, 25 to 50K. Some of them are even bigger. Some of them require, there's a fair enough amount of legal work to set a trust up, and the costs of that can be somewhat daunting, depending on how it's done. So what we tried to do with the BAO was, well, what's the alternative? Because you can't look at a fund that's got a few $1,000s in it and say it's going to cost thousands of dollars for legal, and you can't touch those funds. So what we've tried to do with them is that the first step was to set a line, and right now we're proposing it's $50,000. And so cemeteries that have more than 50K, and there are 8 of those in this diocese, would have the option of either looking at a trust company or going to the second option I'll talk about in a moment. But we really pushed this with the BAO because you need an option that works for small cemeteries, both from a cost and a paperwork perspective. The answer they have come back with is another provincial agency. So that the Ontario Public Guardian and Trustee, or the OPGT, is the provincially owned and regulated guardian. They handle a number of things, including they have a trust fund program, which has a much lower amount of administrative and paperwork to set it up, and without the costs to set it up. So it's much simpler and cheaper, and they have a number of small cemeteries that are already in it. And so that is where we're going to, I believe, we're going to need to go with the bulk of our cemeteries, because going straight into a trust company won't get us there. The OPGT, we have met with them, and they've agreed to work with us on trying to help onboard cemeteries, and the BAO will support that as well. So next steps in this, and I realize this is kind of dropping it because even when I spoke at Synod, we did not have that legislative change resting in front of us. So where we are right now is we're working through with the BAO an inspection and audit of the care and maintenance funds. That project's been going on for a while, but that will finally determine that they're comfortable with the fund and its makeup and the way it's broken through. At the same time, even though this has not got a lot of equity in it, there are over the years there's been unrealized gains that, you know, and like I guess at some points losses, but gains in particular. We need to figure out if we're going to wind the fund up. So a given cemetery may have $10,000, say, in the fund, but there may be a few $1,000s elsewhere that is unrealized gains, and how do we share that out? So that cemetery will have to work with the BAO to determine how those unrealized gains, which are not huge, just so nobody gets the wrong expectation, will need to do to be able to, at the end of it, split the fund up. We would then also, because some of the cemeteries have, looks like for a number of years, there was cemeteries sent donation money in. So the John Jones memorial for $1,000, and that got put into the care and maintenance fund, into the same trust. And it, in theory, is not care and maintenance and needs to be split out. That work we need to do with them. And then we'd get an agreement from them on transferring funds to the new holder, whether that's a new trustee, like a trust company, whether it's OPGT, or leading into my next point, some cases, there's a number of cemeteries that are now identifying that this just isn't workable anymore because of the number of, volunteers that aren't available anymore, because of the escalating costs, to cover their share of the maintenance and grass cutting, insurance. They simply don't produce enough income. So the option on those cemeteries is that those cemeteries roll over to the municipality, and along with the care and maintenance funds and any other funds that cemetery has. So this will be a discussion as we work this through. Each cemetery will be asked to look at their own forward viability, because rather than going through this whole process and moving money to the public trustee and then eventually the cemetery moves to the municipality, it may be that we need to look at these and where it makes sense. And I've got a number of cemeteries this year that have come and said it's time. So we will work through those as we go. But as I said, there's 45 or so cemeteries in the diocese. So this is going to take a significant amount of work, and each one has to be kind of looked at independently. So that is a major piece for us, partly because the fear is if that legislation with the additional penalties and the additional authority gets put in place when they return in the fall, that could make this whole process even more difficult because they're not giving us any flexibility. And we are asking the government to give volunteer, which includes faith-based organizations, a bit of a break with a little more flexibility around cemetery compliance. The laws are written for commercial cemeteries, not for the type that you folks run. So that's the message around cemeteries. The other one I'll cover is the work we have done the past few months around CMM. Again, just to put in frame, Common Mission and Ministry accounts for about 75% of the diocesan income. And so the operation of the diocese itself, the bishop's office, the executive officer in office, finance team, communications, right, all those pieces, and the ministries like doors and those, that's still the core of that. When we started at this some time ago, we were up over 90%. We've now come down to about 75%, but that is still the biggest contributor to the income on which we operate. And it's done based upon the assessable income from 2 years prior. And that simply is to allow information gathering and tracking through. And then assessable income basically is your total income less any excluded or non-assessable items. And you can see some of the things that are listed there. Pass-through items, where you've raised funds in the old days for PWRDF, and things like that. We cemetery income, capital projects have historically not been assessed for income there. Where there's a large ministry program, there's been some exemptions offered on occasion. Grants and loans, etc., aren't accessible, and funds that are invested are held in a reserve and not used for operation in that year. Once they come out and they're used for operation, they become accessible. The CMM rate has been 20% for many, many years. There was some confusion that always exists that it was 25, but actually what it was 20% CMM. And before the systems got updated and the processes changed, the method of allocating clergy benefits happened to line up to 5% of assessable income. And it got done a number of years ago. Those have been around for a while, we transitioned out of that method. But it does still cause some people to say, well, it was 25. No, it is 20, has been for some time. So a few of the things we're dealing with, and one of them is the lag, particularly at a time when incomes change, because you're going to pay for a higher income 2 years ago, and you're paying that from 2 years later with income from that year. The spreadsheet, which was put together, and particularly with a bent to being able to make sure everything reconciles, and that front, those that in the old days, I can't imagine anybody doing this, but that people would sort of work their green sheet to try and minimize their CMM. And again, that's the difference between avoiding and evading. So minimizing it within the rules is absolutely what everybody should be doing. Taking steps beyond that. So that part of the green sheet spreadsheet was intended to try and highlight any of that. It does take time and complexity in order to complete them, and it further takes time and complexity for us to review them, because we have to then take each church's statements and wade through. There's variability in perspective, in attitude, cooperation. Some churches are more cooperative than others, and familiarity. We know that as churches are drawing more income to support their operations with deficits, that makes the income accessible as that happens. And as that becomes a larger pattern, that's another piece we're doing analysis on, to be able to understand how best to work with that. And the other thing is, we've always done them so that we get the complete package done before anybody gets it. And there's churches that get them in very early, and there's churches that we have to chase. And there are churches that complete their own green sheets. There are churches that don't, that request the diocese do that for them. And there's others that just send it and figure we will. So we're trying to, as we go, clean some of that up. We've now built a simplified tool. The Excel tool will continue because some people are very comfortable with it. But the simplified tool is more narrative. And so rather than going into a spreadsheet, you're answering questions. And so that approach is what we've taken. We're trying to get that a couple of pieces around just getting it out there and protecting it. What we're going to do going forward at churches that submit and provide their calculations, their draft, we'll review those first, and they'll get their feedback when it's available, not waiting for us to get all of them done. The canon calls for you to have your vestry report and financial data in, along with your statistics sheet. So what we're trying to make sure that by June we've got vestry report and a set of financials from each church. That's both for the archives and where needed for CMM. We do have a couple of churches that have had real difficulty in providing financial statements. So, and rather than continuing to push that, and again, this is a very, very limited number. What we'll do is, if we have not got financial data by September, we can go to the CRA website and look at the T3010. That will tell us what the total income was. And we'll then apply CMM and issue an invoice on that basis. That wouldn't allow for any deductions. But if the church then wants to come back and say, oops, we now need to submit, then we can adjust the invoice from there. Again, that's a very limited number. And then the last piece is we're continuing to look at what the criteria is. There's those that have suggested we lower the rate but broaden the inclusion. So for example, capital projects. might get included. There's a number of things around that. That would be something that council would approve as a change, and we're not ready yet to go back. We have a student in this summer who's doing a lot of detailed analysis and regression on a number of areas, and this is one of them. So that'll give us the ability to be able to build a model that will allow us to be able to predict how that might look. So the last thing I will mention before we go to Q&A is that the next meeting, our practice is the third Thursday of the month at the end of a quarter. So that would be September the 18th. And with that, we have the bishop, we have executive archdeacon, we have the I do believe I saw the archdeacon of ministry and program, his smiling face in the background. So we are all here, and we'll step into Q&A. Again, you can raise your hand on here. You can also go into the chat. Laura is in here, and she will raise questions that come in on the chat. So first in the queue was Russ.
Thank you. I have two questions. One of them is related to the cemetery, and I appreciate I have some feeling for the difficulty that the BAO is creating for us. I just wanted to clarify that we have a cemetery account here in North Hastings. We used it recently. There was a donation made, and we used it to straighten a whole bunch of headstones, as well as for the cutting of all the grass, which for us is about $500 a pop. That's different, if I understand correctly, than the money that's held at the diocese on deposit for our cemetery. So our bank account locally is different, or not, I guess.
So you have a local operating account.
Yes.
Right? Which is expected, because that's where you would pay the bills. But you would also, and some cemeteries have a number of other accounts. So care maintenance by law has to go into a trust. There's separate ones for the markers, or tombstones and footstones and all that stuff, and a separate one for the cemetery itself, which is pretty usually typically the grass and trees and fences. But those must be held in a trust.
Yes. Okay.
The income, the capital is not usable except a very rare circumstance. And that income goes to the cemetery, normally to the operating account. The other thing is, a number of cemeteries have had money donated, and it's didn't go to the trust. It went to the an investment account. So that, just like the church has in our investment fund, so that's non-regulated money. So a couple of cemeteries have a large holding of non-regulated money. It's not care maintenance money, it's money that's been left to the cemetery.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. The other question I have has to do with the CMM specifically. We've talked about this a little bit in the past, and it particularly related to the expenses associated with fundraising. It all makes sense to me. We have some rentals of our property and so on, which is not an issue. But one of the things we do, and I suspect other churches as well, is food related. So we do, for example, provide food for Meals on Wheels. We work with the Same Care organization on a monthly seniors luncheon. And we do some other programs as well, where we basically buy groceries, prepare food have an event, we receive money for people, either from a partner or from people directly who come in and pay for the meal. And currently the way we report that is that the money goes into our statements as fundraising, and the expenses are shown in the statements as expenses, if you will. So my guess is that is somewhat inflating our income, that it would make sense to actually put in a net amount. So it's how much did we take in at the door after those expenses as a fundraising amount. I'm just curious in terms of your reaction to that.
Yep. And so one of the things we've been trying to do, and it's not a dissimilar thing to the thrift stores, could ask the question saying, well, is there CMM payable on thrift store income? And the answer to that at this point has been no. However, if the thrift store generates a profit, then in theory that unless it's invested in one of the reserve funds or that piece, the profit would be CMMable because it's income to the church.
Indeed.
And that's so what we're trying to do now is where there's a particular program that and we're seeing more of these ministry programs that are built differently, and they flow. It's not the old standard way of, and so basically in those cases, let's have a discussion about what the operation is, how you're accounting for it, and then we can agree on where that fits within the CMM structure. Wayne Thornhill, see your hand is number 2.
Yes, Alex. I have a couple of questions. The first one regarding insurance on churches, etc. We have done quite a bit and are doing quite a bit at our church, St. James in Maitland, and our hall. And what I'm wondering is when we do upgrades and when we do things that are of importance to the long-term structural welfare of the buildings, should we be reporting that to the diocese? For example, we have our 200th anniversary coming up next year, and we're trying to be very proactive in not just for that reason, but in general. So we're at our church hall. We're installing a new septic system this year, which has been a long, drawn-out process. But also, we invited the fire department, who just happened to live right next door to our church hall. We invited them to come over and do a complete inspection of our hall and our church, and we've come up with a new fire plan, and we've upgraded some of the and fulfilled all of the requirements of the fire department. So we're up to snuff there. And we've also engaged an engineering firm who came in a couple of weeks ago and did a structural study and so on our hall and our church. They will be giving us a report outlining any recommendations they have going forward, which we can take a good look at and pick and choose as we go along how we meet those requirements or recommendations, I should say. So should we be reporting that sort of thing to the diocese so the insurance company knows what we're doing?
So first piece is anything that takes a building permit or any kind of permit, like a building permit, that requires council approval before you do it, right? We used to have that $30,000 line, but now it's if it requires a permit, you're supposed to go to council first to get it approved.
What about a septic system?
Well, you got to have permits for a septic system, right?
Well, yeah, we've already gone through a long process with the South Nason Conservation Authority and the township. And in fact, we found out in the process that where our present septic system sits, the township line runs right through the middle of our kitchen. So the township is being very, very good, and they're in the process of doing an encroachment agreement for us. Okay, that will give us the space we need, and that'll be added to the deed for that particular property.
So those kinds of things we should make sure, at least inform us back, because those are pieces that fit into a number of things for the record, because when 30 years from now, when somebody else is looking at all this and goes, how did they solve that? And that's where the old files become very useful. Council approval. The final piece, though, is what the insurer is most interested in is replacement cost. So they don't really give us a discount. So they don't penalize us for the fact that our churches don't have sprinkler systems or fire deterrent systems. They don't penalize us for most of our churches not having fire alarms, or a lot of them. They don't do that. What the property is, their value is keyed around what's the replacement cost. So if you're doing something and you upgrade your kitchen, that those types of things that would change the value to replace your building, that's where the insurer is interested. And so in order for you to be fully, because what'll happen, I'll just make numbers up, Wayne, but if we said your building's worth $1 million, but you did a work that pushed it to 1.2, and then there's a fire, the insurer will only pay up to $1 million, because the replacement cost, but your premium is based on the replacement cost. So there's good and bad. But if you feel you've done a material upgrade to the replacement cost, then we should have ecclesiastical, and with Hub leading them, walk through basically what's a reappraisal process.
Okay, so so there's nothing to prevent us from going ahead with installing the new septic system.
No, I guess in theory you should, and we should put that on the agenda for council so the council approves it. But normally
what are they going to say? No?
Well, that
Don't
normally
do it.
It's what, again, the canon says if there's a permit. So I don't ever recall council saying no, but
Yeah, we're also paying for the surveying costs, and the township is being very good with us in terms of some of the other expenses, but there are expenses involved there.
Yeah,
and sorry, go ahead.
I said, of course, yeah, that's not insignificant.
So we're absorbing those costs, and anyway, now because the encroachment agreement does affect the deed, you need notification on all of that as well, I'm assuming.
Yep, we would, and those things, the survey, and again, the surveys and that in the archives are very important.
Yeah, well, of course, the encroachment will be registered, legally registered and all that sort of thing. But anyway, so when I get all of that finalized, then I can forward that. Would I forward that to you?
Sure. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. The other thing, of course, is on the cemeteries. And as you know, we're dealing with an issue with one of our cemeteries. And we need, of course, or we'll be waiting for Synod to make a decision because Synod holds title. So just on the situation with the building is gone and there is a cemetery sitting there, my understanding is that Synod doesn't want anything to do with it anymore. They'll walk away from it and turn it over to the municipality.
We do not have the ability to operate a cemetery, right? We're not local. We don't have the staff, like none of that. So when the cemetery can't be managed. The term is unfortunate, but the term that is used is abandonment. And that basically, the cemetery is, the municipality is required to take the cemetery. Now, some municipalities are very proactive and helpful. Others will resist. But ultimately, the BAO says there's no choice under the legislation. If they chose to fight it, they'd lose and they'd be assessed costs. So that's
okay.
But that is the
So-
process. We would then begin the process of saying the municipality taking the cemetery.
So then the municipality would be responsible to the rights holders and so on going
That's correct.
forward.
Yep.
Yeah. Because obviously there's plots that have already been paid for and families have, so the township then becomes responsible for administering the whole thing.
Yep,
And
that's correct.
and those funds and trusts to be turned over to the township,
That's
if
correct.
there are any. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay.
The money goes with them, but the responsibility for maintaining the cemetery, the responsibility for, fulfilling the rights that have been sold, all of that moves to the municipality.
Would they continue selling plots?
Some will, some won't.
Okay.
Some are happy to,
all right.
and they generate some income. Some don't want to operate active cemeteries.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, Milton Harding, I don't know if he's still on there or not, but Milton and I spent all last year reviewing and reproducing new bylaws for both cemeteries. And that was a long, complicated, drawn out process. Took about a year, but we finally got it all done and we're fully compliant across the board with our trust funds and everything else. So we're in good shape that way. So anyway, only one other comment I might make is that when you talked about investments, when you withdraw, then they become CMMable kind of thing. And it just kind of strikes me that any church that's fortunate enough to have investments, that when they have to go to them to keep the church running, then they're taxed.
Well, it's not tax. It
is.
It's an apportionment. But the thing is, we could solve that, Wayne, and that would be to assess all income. So that money, when it went in, was not assessed. So that's the key thing. It's a little like an RRSP in that sense. When it goes in, it's not assessed. When you take it out, it is.
You have the benefit. You have the benefit of the interest in between that you earn.
That's correct, and it too is not assessed till you withdraw it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's all for me.
Okay. Thanks, Wayne. Donna Robinson, I see your hand's next up in the queue.
Yeah, is my mic on okay?
Yep.
Good. Just to continue with the cemeteries issue, Alex, and insurance, we'll have the cemetery, as you know, at St. John's Leeds, will not have a building attached to it when that building is dealt with. So is there a process in consultation being prepared for cemeteries that aren't attached to a building for insurance purposes?
From an insurance perspective?
Yeah, because normally, I think, the insurance for a cemetery is attached to a church building.
That's correct. Well,
but we won't have
church
one.
Property, right?
Right, we won't have anything except the cemetery as church property.
And
right?
So that's one where I would expect that the liability insurance because you guys are carrying liability insurance. It's kind of like a tenant's package on your thrift.
Yes, that
store,
was
right?
my secondary question. Yeah.
And that to me would be the option of saying the church is holding liability insurance, which includes your thrift store, but it would then also include the cemetery.
Right. That would make sense to me too. I just don't know if it's happening.
Well, that'll be the approach once that Once that happens, we start into a different space, right? And then the
Right.
question is are you going to continue to run the cemetery going forward?
Yeah.
There has to be insurance on the cemetery.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And so we need to know what that is in terms of our tenants policy, because this is my secondary question. I expect to be asked next week by a new landowner whether I expect for him to ask to see our tenants insurance policy, but we don't have a copy of that. So we need a copy of that tenants insurance.
So that package, you would be in the packet. Those are going out. Laura's working at those this week. So,
And when could we expect that out, do you think?
well, I would say in the next week.
Okay, good, because the new owner will want that certainly in July. Okay. My other question I put in the chat, I don't know, I'm wondering if there is a process for consultation around the accessible and non-accessible CMM. There wasn't any discussion of that at Synod that I saw in the Synod reports. So will there be open discussion about that?
Well, if we're going to change the the things that we're doing now, for example, don't require that kind of process. But if we're going to look at changing what's accessible or changing the rate, my assumption is we would go through a consultation process to say, here's what, here's what we're trying to solve and here's how it's being solved.
Yeah, I would assume we would do that at Synod. I mean, I think that's a critical issue in the diocese and it needs Synod consultation.
It doesn't require Synod, it does not require Synod approval. It's a matter council can handle.
Right, well, that's
on the agenda.
Yeah, well, that's a moot point, I think.
But it does need to be, but that's kind of, that's kind of a moot point. It's procedural point. The real point is there needs to be discussion around it.
Right, yeah. It does. Okay, thank you.
And Pauline Escarod, hand up.
Hi, Alex. My question is regarding the CMM. And is the insurance premium amount considered a capital expense?
No. Insurance is a operating expense.
Okay, thank you.
Laura, do we have anything in the chat?
There's one last question in the chat from Barry Field, and it's when can churches expect to receive the approval of their 2022 assessable income or 2024 CMM?
So we'll be doing the ones that have been submitted. Will happen over the summertime, but the bulk of stuff is probably going to be September, and that's just workload related. But if you've done the green sheet, you have to assume you know how much you're looking at. That's the best estimate there is. George, did you have a question?
Yes, Alex, it's about cemetery. We're at Blue Church, we're thinking of putting the columbarium in. Do we have to require permission from the diocese, seeing it's actually your property, and would that require a building permit?
I have to believe it would require a building permit. Russ is nodding his head, and I know Bancroft put one in. My expectation is it would require a building permit and therefore council approval. And by the way, these things aren't, it's not the boogeyman. It simply comes to council saying, here's the project, there's an estimate for it, we've considered this, there's building permits. It's just a safety valve for everybody involved as those types of projects go. Okay. Coming to council should be a joyful experience.
Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't.
Make a joyful noise unto the Lord.
It is, yeah. Thanks, Alex.
Okay, well, last call on that case, can we turn back to the bishop to close the meeting?
Thank you all for your time. Let's say the grace together. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore. Amen.
Thank you, folks. We will, the charts and or as always, will go up on the website. The recording will go up, and you have the date for our next session. Thanks, everybody. Always great to work through.